How to waste your life and never be happy. A lesson in inner clarity. What if everything you ever wanted still left you feeling empty? This is the story of Noah, a man who spent his whole life chasing success only to find that what he truly longed for was something he had left behind. In this video, you'll follow the quiet unraveling of a soul molded by ambition and the profound transformation that comes not from gaining more, but from remembering what matters. Through a deeply psychological and emotionally resonant narrative, we explore the inner war between societal definitions of success and the deeply human need for connection, meaning, and presence. Stay with us as we uncover not just Noah's journey, but perhaps a mirror to your own, because sometimes the hardest race is the one we run within ourselves, and the real awakening begins only when we finally stop running. A childhood that wasn't lacking, but never quite enough. Noah was born in the late 1970s into a modest household in a quiet American suburb. His parents, John and Sarah, were not poor, but neither were they particularly well off. They worked hard, held steady jobs, and always managed to keep food on the table and the bills paid. They weren't ambitious people. Stability, not success, was their definition of a good life. For Noah and his older brother Alex, this meant a childhood that was safe and relatively quiet. But even in this sense of security, something subtle was always missing. The house was never warm with laughter. Their parents were often tired, distracted, and emotionally distant. Noah would watch his father come home and sink wordlessly into his chair exhausted. His mother, though kind, seemed worn down by routine. Conversations at the dinner table were short and functional. Nothing was dramatically wrong, but love never felt alive in the room. Alex seemed content. He found joy in drawing pictures, camping with friends, and helping his mom in the garden. But Noah, even as a boy, carried a restlessness he couldn't explain. He would sit alone in his room, staring out the window, wondering what it was like to be one of the lucky families, the ones with louder laughter, newer things, happier faces. He didn't know how to name it, but he felt a deep hunger for something more. His first real disappointment came at age 10, when all his classmates received a new toy everyone was talking about. Noah begged for it, but his parents said they couldn't afford it. Not now. Maybe later. Noah didn't understand. He didn't understand why his parents weren't like the others, why they couldn't just say yes. It wasn't the toy that hurt him, but the realization that his family was different, and maybe in his young mind not enough. It was the first quiet crack in his sense of self, the moment he stopped feeling grateful and started wanting more. When joy was traded for comparison. As Noah grew older, the subtle sense of lack inside him only deepened. What began with a toy became a pattern. In middle school, it was the brand of shoes others wore. In high school, it was the cars his friends drove. There was always something just out of reach, something everyone else seemed to have that he didn't. Each time he was denied something he desired, it left a small mark. Not just disappointment, but shame. A quiet shame that whispered maybe he was less, maybe his life was less. Noah never spoke these feelings aloud. He smiled, said thank you, and acted as if it didn't matter. But it always did, and that internal narrative kept growing louder. He didn't just want things. He wanted to be seen as someone who belonged, someone whose life matched the image of success he saw around him. At 16, when his friends were gifted shiny new cars, Noah received shared access to the family vehicle. His parents reminded him to be grateful. They explained their reasons kindly, but it didn't soothe the ache. He accepted their answer with a nod, but something inside closed off. He started to believe that happiness wasn't about connection or experience, but about possession. To be happy, he thought, was to have. His brother Alex remained unchanged. He still found joy in sketching trees, writing music, and hiking trails no one talked about. But to Noah, these things now seemed childish or pointless. Life, he had decided, was a competition, and he didn't want to lose. Without realizing it, Noah began measuring his worth against the world around him. His friends, their houses, their families. Even strangers on the street became silent mirrors for comparison. It never felt like envy exactly. It felt like hunger, a need to fill some invisible gap that kept growing no matter what he tried to place inside it. Vague dreams and blind ambition. By the time Noah entered college, his desires had become more focused, but not necessarily more meaningful. He didn't know what he was passionate about. He only knew what he wanted to achieve. He chose a degree in business not because he loved it, but because he believed it was a path to wealth. To him, money was no longer just a tool. It had become a symbol of validation, proof that he had escaped the limitations of his upbringing. During college, Noah did well academically but remained disconnected. He didn't enjoy his classes, but he forced himself to perform. He networked, attended events, and mimicked the behaviors of people he believed were successful. He learned how to present himself, how to appear confident even when he felt unsure. The image mattered more than the substance. After graduation, he landed an internship at a large corporation. The environment was cold, fast-paced, and impersonal. Noah found no joy in the work, but there was someone he admired, the vice president of sales and marketing. This man exuded power, charm, and success. He had a sleek car, tailored suits, and people listened when he spoke. Noah watched him like a student watches a master. He wanted to be that man, or at least become someone others admired in the same way. That admiration became obsession. Noah began shaping his life around the idea of reaching that level. He stayed late, volunteered for extra work, skipped social events. He told himself it was necessary. Success, he believed, demanded sacrifice, but the sacrifice was blind. He didn't question where it was taking him or whether it aligned with who he was. All that mattered was the goal, the status, the money, the respect. He wasn't building a life. He was chasing an image, running in a race with no finish line. Years passed and Noah remained in the same company, climbing the ladder step by step. He worked harder than most, often staying late, volunteering for tasks others avoided, and sacrificing weekends for deadlines. He told himself this was the price of ambition. He started earning more, dressing sharper, and getting noticed. On the outside, things were going well, but on the inside, everything felt increasingly empty. Noah rarely saw his family. He stopped calling old friends. The hobbies he once enjoyed as a child were long forgotten. There was no time for music, drawing, or camping. Even when he had time, he felt disconnected from those parts of himself. The version of Noah that had once wondered about life, that had sat quietly with feelings, had gone silent. In his place stood a man who measured his days by productivity and progress. Each achievement felt smaller than expected. A promotion would bring brief excitement, followed by the familiar sense of dissatisfaction. He kept waiting for the moment he would feel fulfilled, but it never came. The more he gained, the more he feared losing it. His mind was always reaching, calculating, and comparing. He couldn't rest. Deep down, Noah began to feel tired, but he didn't know how to stop. There was no clear point where he could say he had won. The finish line kept moving. Each time he thought he had arrived, a new standard appeared. A colleague made more. A friend bought a bigger house. Someone else seemed happier. He was never enough, never ahead, always chasing. Still, he believed slowing down would mean falling behind, so he pushed forward faster. He stopped asking why he was running. The race itself became the only thing that gave his life structure. Without it, he feared everything would collapse. And so he ran day after day, hoping one day he would finally arrive at the life he always imagined. Believing in someone else's dream and breaking down. One evening over drinks, Noah's college friend told him about a new company he had joined. It was a startup, fresh and full of promise. The culture was inspiring, the pay was better, and the opportunity for growth was enormous. His friend's eyes sparkled as he spoke about it. Noah listened carefully, feeling something stir in him. A flicker of dissatisfaction began to burn brighter. Maybe he had chosen the wrong path. Maybe success was waiting somewhere else. Noah quit his job not long after. With a strong referral from his friend, he entered the new company with hope. At first, it felt exciting. The environment was fast-paced and ambitious. People talked about visions and goals about changing the industry. Noah thought he had finally found the right place. He threw himself into work, again determined to climb faster, to belong, to matter. For a while, things went well. He moved up quickly, earned praise, and started believing he was on the right track. But then the company was bought out. Overnight, everything changed. Management shifted, teams were let go, and Noah was laid off along with many others. It happened fast, without warning, without thanks. The people at the top walked away with millions. Noah walked away with nothing. He was stunned, not just by the loss of his job, but by the realization that none of it had ever really been his. He had built someone else's dream, invested his energy into someone else's vision. And when it no longer served them, he was discarded. The loyalty he had shown meant nothing. For the first time, Noah questioned the game he had been playing. He had followed every rule, sacrificed everything, and still lost. Was this what success looked like? Was this the reward for devotion? He began to see the cracks not just in the company, but in the entire idea of chasing someone else's version of meaning. And something inside him began to break. Building an empire and trading away the soul. After the shock faded, Noah was filled with a new determination. If building someone else's dream had left him with nothing, then he would build his own. He reached out to a few trusted colleagues, people he had met over the years, who shared his ambition. Together, they started planning. They didn't have a clear idea of what they wanted to create, only that it had to be profitable. Noah no longer cared about passion. He cared about control. They studied the market, identified trends, and built a business around the most lucrative opportunity they could find. It was hard at first, long days, endless meetings, and constant pressure. But Noah was relentless. He cut out distractions. He no longer spoke to people unless they had something to offer. His world narrowed to strategy, execution, and results. Years passed. The company grew. Noah became a respected name in the industry. Clients trusted him. Investors called. The business was thriving and profits soared. Noah had achieved what he set out to do. He had power. He had wealth. He had won. But life outside of work had vanished. Relationships faded. His family saw him only on holidays. Romantic connections never lasted. He traveled constantly, rarely rested, and lived in a cycle of deadlines. The more successful he became, the more isolated he felt. He had built an empire, but its walls kept everything out, even himself. One day, a major corporation made an offer to acquire the company. The deal went through. Noah walked away with $15 million. He had reached the summit he once dreamed of. And yet, as he stood at the top, the view felt strangely hollow. Having it all, and yet having nothing real. A year after selling the company, Noah found himself with more freedom than he had ever known. He could go anywhere, buy anything, and live without obligation. Yet every day felt strangely weightless. Without work to anchor his routine, time stretched endlessly. The things he used to long for now sat around him in silence, stripped of meaning. The luxury car, the penthouse, the designer suits. They were all there, but they didn't speak to him. They didn't fill the space he had tried so hard to occupy. His friendships had changed. Most of the people around him now were business contacts or ambitious acquaintances. Conversations felt shallow. When he spoke about his life, people listened with admiration, but no one really asked how he felt. Romantic relationships came and went, often centered on status or money. Noah felt like an accessory to his own wealth, valuable only for what he owned, not for who he was. On Christmas, he visited his family, something he rarely did. There he saw Alex again. His brother looked older, but peaceful. They talked in the kitchen while others chatted in the living room. Noah shared honestly for the first time in a long while. He said he felt lost, bored, and unsure of what to do with himself. He admitted he had everything he wanted, and yet something essential was missing. Alex listened without judgment. When asked how he was doing, Alex said he had been painting and spending time with his kids. He spoke of simple joys, nature, creativity, connection. Noah noticed the brightness in Alex's eyes, the ease in his voice. There was something whole about him. Something grounded. In that moment, Noah realized just how far he had drifted from himself, reuniting with the light once forgotten. After that evening with Alex, something shifted in Noah. It was subtle at first, a quiet discomfort that stayed with him long after he left. He kept replaying Alex's words in his mind, especially the way he spoke about his life with calm certainty. There was no performance, no need to impress, just clarity, just presence. Noah realized how rare that had become in his own world. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to slow down. He stayed home more, turned off his phone, and sat in silence. At first, it was unbearable. Without noise or distraction, thoughts he had long avoided began to surface. Regrets, loneliness, the feeling that he had built his life on expectations that were never his to begin with. It was not easy, but it was honest. Noah started journaling. He wrote about the years he had lost, the people he had pushed away, the version of himself he no longer recognized. He didn't know what he wanted next, but he knew he couldn't keep living the way he had. He began seeing a therapist, not because he was broken, but because he wanted to understand. The sessions were slow, emotional, and often uncomfortable, but each one peeled back another layer of the armor he had worn for so long. He reconnected with old friends. He apologized to people he had neglected. He picked up a sketch pad for the first time in decades. His drawings were clumsy, but something about the act felt familiar, real. It wasn't about being productive. It was about being alive. In those quiet moments, Noah began to remember who he was before the race began. Inner collapse in the first step toward healing. The more Noah turned inward, the more he realized how much he had abandoned himself. He saw the years where he had ignored his own voice, chasing validation in titles, money, and approval. It wasn't just exhaustion he felt now. It was grief. Grief for the time lost, the people lost, and the parts of himself he had silenced. For the first time, he allowed himself to mourn. His therapist helped him sit with these emotions without judgment. Noah cried in sessions, not from one specific incident, but from the weight of everything he had carried without knowing. It was the cry of a man who had lived too long in performance and too little in presence. He began to see how his need for success had been a shield protecting him from feelings he didn't know how to face. He started to understand the roots of his beliefs, that being enough was never about doing more, but about accepting more of himself. He remembered moments from childhood he had buried, when he first felt unseen, when he first believed he had to prove his worth. These memories hurt, but they also offered insight. Slowly, Noah began rewriting the story he had been telling himself for decades. He also began to forgive his parents, his younger self, even the people who had disappointed him. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant letting go of the armor. the anger, the illusion that pain could be avoided by staying strong. Through this process, Noah didn't become perfect. He became real, and that was the beginning of healing. Not dramatic, not easy, but honest. It wasn't about fixing who he was. It was about remembering who he had always been underneath all the striving, starting over from within. As Noah moved through the process of healing, he realized that he didn't need to start a new life. He needed to return to his life with new eyes. The world around him had not changed, but something inside him had. He no longer felt the urge to prove himself. He no longer needed to be admired. What he wanted now was something simpler, quieter, and more real. He began his days differently. Instead of checking emails or scanning headlines, he sat in silence. He journaled not for productivity, but for clarity. He took long walks without a destination. He cooked his own meals and cleaned his space with care. These small acts became rituals, grounding him in the present moment. They reminded him that life didn't need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. Noah also redefined work. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs not for money, but for the joy of sharing what he had learned. He gave talks at community events and volunteered his time with local organizations. Slowly, he built a rhythm that honored both his skills and his soul. It wasn't about building empires anymore. It was about building days he didn't want to escape from. He spent more time with his family. He called his brother more often, played with his nieces, and listened with presence. The conversations were unpolished, sometimes awkward, but they were honest. He no longer needed to have the right answers. He just needed to show up. In this new way of living, Noah discovered a different kind of success, one that didn't shout, one that didn't shine from the outside. It was quiet, rooted, and personal, and it was enough. Meaning doesn't need to be found. It was always there. One quiet afternoon, Noah sat on a park bench watching children play in the distance. The breeze was gentle, the sky wide and open. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he needed to be anywhere else. He wasn't chasing, fixing, proving, or preparing. He was just there, and that was enough. It struck him that what he had long searched for was never lost. It had always been around him, waiting for him to slow down and see it. He thought back to his childhood, to the moments that had once felt small or meaningless. The bike rides with Alex, the smell of dinner in the kitchen, the sound of rain on the window. They weren't obstacles on the way to happiness. They were happiness itself. He had spent so long trying to escape the ordinary that he missed how sacred it really was. Noah realized that meaning was not something to achieve, it was something to live with. It didn't come from success or recognition. It came from presence, from choosing to stay with what is real, even when it's quiet or uncertain. He had once believed that happiness belonged to those who had everything. Now he saw that happiness belongs to those who are truly here. The world had not changed, but his way of seeing it had. Where he once saw lack, he now saw richness. Where he once felt pressure, he now felt peace. He smiled not because everything was perfect, but because he finally understood he didn't need it to be. And in that stillness, in that quiet simplicity, Noah found what he had been missing all along. Not something new, not something more, but something true, something that had been waiting for him to come home. Noah's story is not one of failure or regret. It is a story of remembering, of turning inward when the world outside no longer satisfies. We are not here to win the race, but to be awake for the journey. And sometimes the greatest success is simply learning how to live, not louder, but deeper.